Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to review this classic album from 1970 from Simon and Garfunkel. It was their last effort together before they split up, and it was released in January 1970. The previous album had been Bookends, previous year, with such tracks such as At the Zoo and Mrs. Robinson, and that was critically acclaimed. And then this album came out, sold by the bucket load, #1 on both sides of the Atlantic. I don't know about critics at the time, but over the years this album has kind of, and even at the time actually, I think, it divided opinion. Some people thought it was too slick, some people thought it was a bit too poppy or something. It really defies belief how much stick this album's come in for, really, because I guess it's the case with any album which is mega successful. It always has its detractors. People love to knock what's popular, and same you could say is true for Sgt. Pepper and Thriller, Michael Jackson, or Fleetwood Mac Rumours. People always find fault with these great albums. Back in Black, AC/DC. But anyway, this album to me is more or less faultless. It's a 5-star album, and it's a great way for them to close their career, Simon and Garfunkel. No, in later years, even Paul Simon would refer to the Simon and Garfunkel period as early work, somewhat disparagingly. And although I love his solo work, particularly his 1970s solo work, I would say some of the songs on here are amongst the most mature of his career. So early work, I think, is a bit too dismissive. Yes, he did go on to do as good, if not better, songs in the 70s, but there's a few songs on here which are right up there with his best. And I don't actually think there's much filler on here. Maybe not all the songs are 10 out of 10, but I'm just going to read you some, I was going to say amusing, but they're actually quite annoying. One in particular from Ian MacDonald, the famous author who wrote Revolution in the Head, who wrote for the New Musical Express. In 2001 he did a retrospective review for Uncut magazine, and he called this album overproduced and underwritten. And he says, whereas the previous album, Bookends, had been succinct, dry and disciplined, he calls this album self-satisfied, sentimental, mediocre and overblown. Absolutely ridiculous comment from Ian MacDonald. It's not the first time I've disagreed vehemently with him. He, in his book Revolution in the Head, he takes issue with such great tracks as Across the Universe. But anyway, it's only one man's opinion, and the public didn't listen to the reviews at the time if they were negative, and most of them were positive. And how could they not be? I mean, by the way, very amusing cover here with Paul Simon's hairline looking a bit like a giant moustache for Art Garfunkel. I'm not sure if that was deliberate, but it's pretty amusing. And great cover. I think the two were pretty good friends up until, and the split at the time was fairly amicable. Since then they've had their bust-ups. Nice picture of them on the back cover, and the lyrics, which is always nice to have on an album. So I think the background to this album was Art Garfunkel was going away to, I think it was South America, to film a film called Catch-22. And he was away rather longer than expected, and Paul Simon got a bit annoyed by that. But I think the main reason for the breakup is Paul Simon wanted to explore some individual music and some further develop, themes such as reggae and later in his career what we call world music. And he did that very successfully, but that's not the purpose of this review. This review is of their last album together, and this book here, which is picked up at a jumble sale not so long ago, it's got each month of 1970 is depicted with pictures, but what is most useful is the charts, the number one album and single in the US and in the UK for each week, for each month. So I can tell you that in the UK, in fact in both the US and the UK, the previous number one album was Led Zepp 2. Bridge Over Troubled Water hit number one in March 1970 in the UK and last week of February in the US. And there were 2 weeks in last 2 weeks of March where Bridge Over Troubled Water, first 2 weeks of April, I'll get this right, hold on. First 2 weeks of March where the number one single and the number one album in the US was Bridge Over Troubled Water, the song, and Bridge Over Troubled Water, the album. And that's, you guys tell me if you can think of an occasion when that's happened, and I think that's pretty remarkable. And in the US, Bridge Over Troubled Water was taken over at the number one spot by Let It Be, by the Beatles. In the UK, Let It Be was kept at number 2 by the same song. So, Paul Simon has remarked on the similarity between Let It Be and Bridge Over Troubled Water. I mean, they're not the same song by any means, but they're instrumentally they are quite similar, and tempo-wise. And I think when John Lennon was interviewed in Rolling Stone, he said, when he was asked about Let It Be, he said he thought Paul was trying to write a Bridge Over Troubled Water, which is a bit of an amusing comment because Bridge Over Troubled Water, Let It Be predates Bridge Over Troubled Water, I'm pretty sure, having been recorded in January '69, and this whole album was recorded in November and early December 1970. Sorry, 69. So same year, but a few months later. So anyway, enough of the background. The songs. The title track, Bridge Over Troubled Water, has gone down in history as a classic, quite rightly so. Garfunkel was the one to suggest the third verse, Sail On Silver Girl. Originally it was just 2 verses. It's a beautiful song, and I think Paul Simon made the right decision. Quite generous of him to let our Garfunkel sing one of his most famous compositions ever and get a lot of the credit for it, which caused a bit of resentment over the years from Paul Simon, but he definitely, his voice was suited to this song, and he does an absolutely marvellous job. And if you've ever heard Paul Simon trying to sing this song, he does a creditable job, but he doesn't do anything like the majestic performance that Art Garfunkel gives it. And brilliant piano from Larry Netchell, and then later on in concert Richard T would do the piano quite often. And it's just a really brilliant melodic song and a very nice sentiment behind the words. You know, if you've got problems, I'll be the bridge over troubled water, basically. I've used it myself as a phrase over the years. It's a very apt phrase for certain situations if you want to be the the voice of reason, or the voice of peace or reconciliation. So a great start to the album, number one single, as I said, both sides of the Atlantic. And then we have a kind of traditional Latin American melody, El Condor where Paul Simon's written new words, and it was made very famous by Simon and Garfunkel, though the tune obviously predates it by, I'm not sure how long, but it's quite an old tune, I think. And they do a nice version, and good use of flutes. I'm not sure if they're credited, the flutes or recorders or whatever, not specifically credited here. And then we have Cecilia, which some people say is a throwaway commercial track, but I think it's absolutely brilliant. Up there, and deservedly was put on the Greatest Hits album. It's infectious, it's really catchy melody, very humorous words, and great singing from Simon and Garfunkel on this their farewell album. And you know, one did miss that the vocals went so well together of those two that in the solo years one did on occasions miss this kind of thing. They really, I mean, Paul Simon could have done a perfectly good solo version of this track, I'm sure, but I think it belongs as a Simon and Garfunkel track, and the same goes for the next song, Keep the Customer Satisfied, another throwaway in some people's opinion, but very upbeat song, catchy, about the never-ending, touring endlessly and having to keep the customer or keep the punter satisfied, and maybe the touring was getting Paul Simon down by this stage, but the tune belies the lyrics because it's a very upbeat tune and melody, and again great singing from the two of them. So I think it's a strong song. So Long Frank Lloyd Wright is not only a tribute to the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, but apparently is also a kind of tribute to Art Garfunkel, who apparently had originally wanted to become an architect. So again, more evidence here of a very nice relationship that they had, even though they were about to split. You wouldn't hear John singing to Paul a farewell song like this, or vice versa, around the time of the Beatles split, for sure. So Paul Simon, architects may come and architects may come, and never change your point of view. When I run dry, I stop a while and think of you. Really nice, heartfelt lyrics, and a great end to side one with a great vocal from Art Garfunkel, which again Paul Simon must have asked him to sing this one, and he does a superb job. And moving over to side two, by the way, I'll just show you the label. It's on the standard CBS. I think this is a late 70s pressing of the album. It's not an original, 69, 70, came out in January 70. So side two opens with the Boxer, which again has gone down in history as a classic, quite rightly, and it is. Paul Simon's lyrics are among the finest of his entire career, and the only criticism of this song is maybe it goes on a minute too long, with the chorus at the end being extended, but I love it to bits. The verse in particular is absolutely sublime, and great harmony from Garfunkel, and one of the very best songs in the top 5 probably. Baby Driver, if you really being strict, I suppose this is the weak song on the album, the weakest song on the album. It's a kind of fun number, a bit dismissible, a bit like the song about English muffins on the previous album. It's not bad, but it's no great shakes. The album recovers superbly with The Only Boy Living in New York, which is, again, Paul Simon I think wrote this about Art Garfunkel, because he was Tom and Jerry was the original name of Simon and Garfunkel, and the opening line, Tom, get your plane right on time, I know your parcel go fine, fly down to Mexico. So Art Garfunkel was going down to Mexico to film Catch-22, and the melody is one to die for, and the harmonies from Garfunkel are just brilliant, and they really go for it on those the instrumental vocal verses towards the end of the song. They really go for it, and Garfunkel actually said that Bob Dylan was in the studio when they recorded this particular vocal, so that's interesting. And then Why Don't You Write Me is very nicely sequenced following that slower song, a nice bit of sort of reggae early attempt at reggae from Paul Simon, which he would develop in his solo career with Mother and Child Reunion and stuff. This attempt works fine in my opinion. Why Don't You Write Me? Why Don't You Write Me? Amusing lyrics, not much of a message in the song other than Why Don't You Write Me, but brilliant melody and brilliant singing, brilliant instrumentation, and I love this track to bits. It's one of my favourites on the album. And then we have a cover of Bye Bye Love, the Everly Brothers song, which is actually taken from a live concert from late '69, I think, and it works okay, but it's a little bit out of place on this album perhaps, but nice version, better version than the one George Harrison would do on Dark Horse for sure, more faithful to the original. So the album ends with Song for the Asking, which is another very heartfelt song. Paul Simon takes the lead, and this has been said to be the song from one of them to the other and vice versa. you know, even though they're splitting up. Thinking it over, I've been sad. Thinking it over, I'd be more than glad to change my ways for the asking. Ask me and I will play all the love that I hold inside. So a nice sort of peace gesture to each other, perhaps, although I don't know if Paul Simon's ever confirmed that. Very strong, heartfelt, emotional lyrics, very strong melody, and superbly produced by Paul Simon, Art Garfunkel, actually says Arthur Garfunkel on here, and Roy Haley, the faithful Roy Haley. Drums from Hal Blaine, bass from Joe Osborne, and piano from, as I say, Larry Mitchell. So I think this album is a towering achievement, and I will defend it, and I really can't understand why critics or some critics have a problem with it. Maybe it's jealousy creeping in, because anyone who can produce an album of this quality, sustained quality, is pretty much a genius in my book. Or maybe I should call them both geniuses, although Paul Simon obviously wrote the material. Thank you for watching. See you next time.